Welcome in. Whether you are prepping for a big meeting, trying to catch up on a rapidly evolving industry, or you're just, deeply curious about the mechanics of global culture, you're in the exact right place today.
You really are. It is a massive topic.
It is. Today, we are going on a deep dive, custom tailored for you, the learner. We have a pretty dense stack of source material to get through, primarily focusing on this really fascinating briefing document. It maps out the complete chronological history of one of the most unstoppable forces in modern entertainment, which is K-pop.
Unstoppable is definitely the right word. It truly is a cultural juggernaut. And looking at it purely through a historical lens reveals so much about modern media.
Right.
The mission for our deep dive today is to map out the 5 distinct generations of this industry. We're going to decipher exactly how it transformed from a domestic music scene into a highly optimized worldwide phenomenon. A phenomenon that has essentially rewired the entire music business.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because whether you are a hardcore fan with a shelf full of albums, or you're just someone who tracks massive global market trends from the outside, understanding this generational breakdown completely changes how you view the pop music machine.
It shifts your entire perspective.
Exactly. We are starting at the blueprint phase, the first generation. This covers the late 1990s through the early 2000s. And what stands out immediately in the briefing document is that the massive, complex infrastructure we associate with the industry today wasn't some happy accident.
Not at all.
It was heavily engineered right out of the gate.
That is the absolute crucial takeaway for this era. They established what the industry formally calls the idol system.
Right.
The architects of this generation didn't just, scout a few talented kids, throw them in a studio, and cross their fingers.
Hoping for a hit.
Exactly. They built rigorous, multi-year trainee programs from the ground up. The daily schedules were intense. We were talking about combining vocal training, dance, media readiness, and even language courses, long before a debut was ever guaranteed.
I always find it fascinating to compare that to Western music history. You look at Lou Pearlman's boy bands in the U.S. during the same era, or the old Mickey Mouse Club pipeline, and you might think it's the exact same thing. But the Korean blueprint was fundamentally different in its division of labor, right?
Distinctly different. I mean, the Western model was often about finding a lead singer and backing them up with harmonies.
Right, a frontman.
Exactly.
Right.
But the first generation K-pop model assigned incredibly rigid official positions to maximize the group's overall utility.
Right, you have your main vocal, your lead rapper, your main dancer, and of course the visual. Every single member had a designated structural purpose that they were expected to fulfill flawlessly.
Yes.
And that level of engineering extended straight through to the consumer experience too. This era standardized the official fan clubs, established the synchronized choreography specifically designed for mass participation, and introduced the light sticks.
It was a fully packaged, self-sustaining ecosystem. They understood early on that selling a CD was a one-time transaction. But selling an identity and a community, that created a recurring revenue model.
The key players laying down this foundation were groups like HOT, Sex Keys, FinKL, and SES. SES is heavily highlighted in our sources because they were formed by SM Entertainment and effectively pioneered the ethereal, innocent concept.
They set the gold standard for that.
They really did. For the next 20 years, countless groups would debut using that exact same aesthetic blueprint before eventually evolving their sound.
What's fascinating here is the strategic focus regarding geography during this first generation. The primary objective was absolute domestic dominance. The market share within South Korea was the ultimate prize.
But they were looking outward, too.
They were. The agencies were already treating neighboring markets like China and Japan as beta tests. They were planting seeds, organizing small tours, and proving that this highly engineered idol model could cross borders and language barriers if translated correctly.
Which sets us up perfectly for the mid-2000s and early 2010s. We enter the second generation, and this is where that regional expansion just catches fire.
It exploded.
This era sparked the initial Hallyu wave, the Korean wave. They took that 90s blueprint and actively pushed it onto the wider international stage.
The ambition scaled up significantly.
Yeah.
And you start to see the groups themselves fragmenting into much more distinct musical identities to capture different demographics.
You see that fragmentation clearly in the milestones our sources highlight. I mean, you have the Wonder Girls achieving something monumental by pushing their hit Nobody onto the U.S. Billboard charts.
Huge moment.
Huge. Then you have Girls' Generation just completely locking down the Asian market with some of the most polished, pristine pop music ever recorded. But then you get the pivot.
The darker sound.
Right. Groups like Big Bang and 2NE1 completely disrupted that ethereal standard by injecting heavy hip-hop elements and club-ready EDM into the mix. 2NE1 really championed that fierce girl crush concept. It was a sharp, edgy departure from the first generation vibe. Oh, and SHINee is consistently cited here as a massive pillar of this era's expansion.
Especially with their complex vocal arrangements and their choreography, it was next level. The music was undeniably shifting across the board. But if we are analyzing the real catalyst of the second generation, it comes down to technology.
The internet changes everything.
It does. The infrastructure of the music industry was fundamentally changing beneath their feet. This was the dawn of YouTube and the explosion of early social media.
The death of the traditional gatekeeper.
Precisely. Before this, if you wanted a song to break in the US or Europe, you needed a radio programmer or an MTV executive to champion it. YouTube allowed the Korean agencies to bypass those Western media gatekeepers entirely.
Fans could just find it on their own.
Exactly. International fans could discover a high-budget music video organically, share it on forums, and build communities without ever needing permission from the traditional music press.
And the fans themselves became the distributors. You had people ripping videos, adding fan subs, and circulating them globally. That organic, tech-driven community building is the bridge to the absolute explosion that happens next.
The turning point.
We move into the years between roughly 2012 and 2018. Welcome to the third generation. Here's where it gets really interesting, because this is the era of total, undeniable global domination. K-pop shatters the glass ceiling entirely.
The word global is thrown around so casually in entertainment, but this generation actually earned the title. The groups emerging in this window didn't just chart on occasion, they established themselves as permanent titans of the global music industry.
The sources don't mince words about the sheer scale here. You have BTS fully breaching the US mainstream, topping the Billboard charts repeatedly, and achieving household name status globally.
Unprecedented.
And you have Blackpink cementing themselves as the biggest girl group on the planet, which really culminated in that historic Coachella headline performance. And flanking them are groups like EXO and TWICE, moving tens of millions of physical albums and selling out stadium tours worldwide.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the defining paradigm shift of the third generation wasn't the music itself, or even the massive budgets. The true innovation was the weaponization of the fandom.
Weaponization is a strong word, but it fits.
It does. We touched on early social media in the second generation. But by the third generation, platforms like Twitter, VLive, and YouTube had evolved into direct, highly sophisticated fan communication ecosystems.
It went from just dropping a music video to creating an illusion of constant accessibility. Live streaming from a hotel room in Tokyo after a stadium show, instantly translating inside jokes for millions of followers on Twitter, it fed the parasocial relationship on a scale we had never seen before.
And that accessibility mobilized the fans into a highly organized, decentralized marketing arm. These massive worldwide fandom cultures weren't just passively streaming music on their morning commutes.
No, they were working.
They were running complex logistical operations. They organized global streaming campaigns to manipulate international algorithms. They crowd-funded massive billboard campaigns in Times Square. They translated thousands of hours of variety show content into dozens of languages in real time.
Incredible.
The fandoms essentially became as powerful and structured as the entertainment agencies themselves.
It's staggering when you look at the sheer logistical power of those fan bases. They functioned like multinational corporations. But the entertainment industry is ruthless, and you can't rely on the same tricks forever.
The market adapts.
Exactly. By the time we hit 2018, stretching to about 2022, the market was incredibly saturated. The agencies had to innovate rapidly to maintain that global momentum. This brings us to the fourth generation. Our briefing document defines this era by a noticeable spike in choreography difficulty and the absolute non-negotiable necessity of TikTok virality.
The challenge of the fourth generation was capturing attention in a vertically scrolling algorithmic void. The dance challenges had to be visually arresting within the first 3 seconds, which meant the choreography became incredibly athletic.
It had to pop instantly on a tiny screen.
Right. But beyond the dancing, this generation leaned into aggressive conceptual differentiation. A catchy song wasn't enough anymore. The groups needed razor-sharp, highly specific identities.
The case studies in the briefing document highlight this perfectly. You look at Stray Kids, who really ran with the self-producing idol trend. They heavily emphasized that the members themselves were writing and producing the tracks, which added a layer of perceived authenticity.
A very smart move.
Then you have ITZY building their entire musical identity around aggressive self-confidence and individuality.
Which is a really smart evolution of the second generation's girl crush concept.
Yeah.
Instead of just projecting an edgy attitude, ITZY made the empowerment theme the literal textual core of their brand.
Exactly. And then IVE arrives and introduces what the sources refer to as the COBOL crush concept.
That one is fascinating.
It really is. Tapping into that specific, untouchable, ultra-wealthy aesthetic was brilliant because it fed directly into Gen Z's growing obsession with quiet luxury and high-fashion exclusivity on platforms like TikTok. But the group that pushed the conceptual boundary the furthest is definitely aespa.
Without a doubt.
They didn't just debut with a unique sound. They introduced AI, virtual avatars, and complex digital storytelling into their actual group dynamic.
aespa is arguably the most ambitious case study of the fourth generation. They released music, yes, but they were also releasing a dense, serialized mythology.
For you listening, imagine what it means to consume music this way. It's not just streaming a single on Spotify while you work out. You are entering a high-concept universe. There is sprawling lore, recurring villains like the Black Mamba, virtual realms like Kwanga, and digital counterparts to the human members.
It's cinematic?
It is world-building on a scale usually reserved for massive sci-fi franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but applied entirely to a pop music group.
From a business perspective, it is a brilliant strategy for retention. It creates an incredibly sticky ecosystem. The consumer is constantly decoding music videos, looking for hidden visual Easter eggs, and analyzing lyrics to understand the next chapter of the narrative.
Keeping them hooked.
Yes. It demands deep, active engagement, which is the most valuable currency in the modern attention economy.
Though it does make you wonder about the sheer stamina required from the artists themselves. In the fourth generation, they have to be world-class vocalists, athletes capable of brutal choreography, and essentially full-time lore-accurate content creators for social media. It is a grueling standard.
It is an immense amount of pressure, and it leads directly to the structural changes we are seeing today.
So what does this all mean? We've traced the evolution from local trainees in the 90s all the way to sci-fi pop avatars in 2022. That brings us to the present day, the fifth generation, spanning from 2023 to right now. And the briefing document highlights a monumental philosophical shift taking place as we speak. The industry is now prioritizing the system over the geography.
This might be the most significant evolution in the entire timeline. The fundamental definition of the genre is being rewritten. For decades, K-pop meant Korean artists promoting their music abroad. Today, it is rapidly shifting to mean global members from any country trained within the K-pop methodology.
You see it instantly when you look at the new roster of groups. Take Katseye, for example. They were formed via a massive global audition project in partnership with HYBE, featuring members from diverse backgrounds all over the world.
A truly global group.
Or look at XG. You have a group backed by a Japanese label singing entirely in English, yet they operate within the traditional Korean industry framework and promote heavily on Korean music broadcast shows.
It represents a complete blurring of traditional industry borders. And stylistically, the fifth generation is highly reactive to global trends. You have groups like Illite tapping into that softer, highly nostalgic Y2K aesthetic that is dominating global fashion.
Well, on the other end of the sonic spectrum, you have Baby Monster carrying forward the specific, hard-hitting performance powerhouse legacy of YG Entertainment. They are inheriting the DNA built by 2NE1 and perfected by Blackpink, but executing it for an entirely new demographic.
This raises an important question. If the groups are now multinational, singing in English or Japanese, and formed through global auditions, how does the industry maintain its distinct edge?
Right, what makes it unique anymore?
The answer outlined in the sources is total, frictionless integration into the broader global entertainment machine. It is no longer a niche export. It is fully integrated into Western markets.
We're talking about standardizing global brand ambassadorships. It is an expectation now that these artists will sit front row at high fashion weeks in Paris and Milan. Headlining massive global stadium tours is the baseline goal for a successful group, not a rare exception.
It's the new normal.
Our sources refer to this current era as the new experimental phase, pointing to groups like Hunt ERX as prime examples of this global hybrid approach. The industry is utilizing multinational training systems where talented kids from anywhere on the planet travel to learn this highly specific methodology.
We are seeing debuts driven by high-stakes survival shows that are heavily swayed by global fan voting metrics. And taking the virtual concepts of the fourth generation even further, we're seeing the rise of entirely AI-generated and virtual idols.
The methodology itself has become the primary export. The K in K-pop used to be a strict geographical identifier. Now it stands for a highly specialized, ruthlessly efficient framework for manufacturing global entertainment. It is a remarkable trajectory when you view it from a bird's-eye perspective. To quickly recap the journey we've mapped out from our sources today, we started in the late 90s with the first generation, an era that engineered a brilliant, highly structured domestic system, establishing the trainee pipelines, the assigned group roles, and the foundational fan infrastructure.
Setting the stage.
Then the second generation took that blueprint and rode the Hallyu wave across Asia and into the early US markets, capitalizing on the democratizing power of early social media and YouTube.
Then came the explosion.
The third generation achieved total global domination, where direct-to-fan platforms allowed acts like BTS and Blackpink to mobilize worldwide highly organized armies of fans. The fourth generation had to fight for attention in a saturated market through intense lore, high-concept visual identities, and grueling TikTok virality.
And now we are here.
And now, the fifth generation has transformed the genre into an unstoppable hybrid global force, prioritizing the system over the origin. Understanding these 5 distinct steps isn't just a lesson in music history. It is a masterclass for you in how culture scales globally, adapts to technology, and ultimately rewires consumer behavior.
It absolutely is a masterclass in scale and adaptation. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've spent this time tracing how a highly engineered, meticulously optimized training system conquered the global music market.
Right.
But if this model multinational groups, intense structural polish, and algorithm-friendly conceptual lore becomes the undisputed standard for global pop success. Wait, let me rephrase that. If this highly polished system becomes the undisputed standard, what happens to the traditional Western archetype of the messy, organic, garage band solo artist?
The person just playing in their basement.
Exactly. If hyper-engineered systems continuously dominate the charts and command the massive global fan bases, will the Western music industry eventually have to adopt this exact same infrastructure to survive? Will this completely erase the era of the organically discovered pop star?
It is a wild reality to consider the next time you are scanning the global charts and looking at who is actually moving the needle. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and exploring the mechanics behind the music. Keep learning, keep questioning the systems around you, and we will catch you next time.